Welcome to the 2026 AHEAD Program webinar. Here is our agenda for today. First, we'll provide an introduction to the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. Next, we'll go over the AHEAD program summary. Then we'll discuss the application and budget and walk through a case study together. Finally, we'll spend some time discussing the disbursement and compliance phases for those projects that are awarded for an award. Introduction. Before we dive in, let's give a brief overview of our organization for those that are less familiar with the bank. The Federal Home Loan Bank system was chartered by Congress in 1932 during the Great Depression as a funding resource for the home mortgage lenders. Today, lending institutions use federal home loan banks to finance housing and economic development in their communities. There are 11 federal home loan banks nationwide, and each operates as a private cooperative financial institution. We are a government-sponsored enterprise and are regulated by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA, which is the same regulator as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. As previously mentioned, federal home loan banks are cooperatives, and the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is owned by our member institutions headquartered in our district of Arizona, California, and Nevada. Our members include commercial banks, savings institutions, credit unions, insurance companies, and non-depository community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. The mission of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is to provide our members with reliable access to low-cost liquidity, essential financial services, and expertise, and resources for affordable housing and economic development. The bank has a public service mission and offers a range of products and services to benefit its members and the communities they serve. This diagram demonstrates all of the products and services we provide our members to support their community and economic development needs. Most people in the community development space know the bank because of our Affordable Housing Program, or AHP. We are required by our regulator, the FHFA, to use 10% of our annual net income for AHP. In the interest of time, I will just point out a few of these. First is our AHP General Fund and Nevada Targeted Fund. These are project-based grants for multifamily and owner-occupied affordable housing development projects. Next is our AHP Set Aside or WISH, which are grants for down payment and closing cost assistance to low-income first-time homebuyers. Our bank offers other voluntary programs like the Middle Income Down Payment Assistance, or MDPA program. You can learn more on our website. We're now going to give an overview of the AHEAD program. AHEAD stands for Access to Housing and Economic Assistance for Development. AHEAD grants provide funding for targeted economic development projects that benefit low to moderate income communities. AHEAD grants support innovative, targeted initiatives that will create economic opportunity by piloting new interventions or expanding proven development models. As an economic development grant program, projects must lead to outcomes such as job creation, preservation, improved individual and family self-sufficiency, or upward economic mobility, for example. AHEAD was started in 2004 and has been funded annually since that time. Since inception, AHEAD has awarded over $40 million to about 950 projects across the bank's district. AHEAD is highly competitive. In 2025, we received over 400 applications requesting nearly $50 million. Ultimately, We were able to fund 64 projects, or about 16% of applications. We expect this year to be similarly competitive. We have limited funds and award a diversity of projects, which we'll discuss further. The bank's board of directors approved $10 million in funding for this year. Grants can request up to $200,000 in funding. This is up from the $150,000 maximum in 2025. AHEAD has the following eligibility requirements. The project sponsor must be a nonprofit, local government, or tribal association. Projects must be located in Arizona, California, or Nevada. Grant funds must be fully used by March 2028. Funds will be available for awarded projects starting in September 2026. The grant period is 18 months. Sponsors that show a pattern of not using the funds within 18 months of award will be noted when reviewing future applications. AHEAD projects involve two parties. The sponsor or project sponsor refers to the nonprofit organization, local government agency, or tribal association that will ultimately use the AHEAD grant funds for their project. The project proposes and implements the project. A sponsor must partner with a member. The member refers to the financial institution that is a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. These could be banks, credit unions, CDFIs, etc. The member is the organization that supports the application and disperses the grant award from our bank to the sponsor. All applications must be submitted by a bank member. New this year, members are now limited to submitting a maximum of 10 applications per program year. Both the sponsor and the member are responsible for the project's completion and final grant reporting. If a sponsor is looking for a member to partner with on an application, they can refer to the member directory on our website. For sponsors who have received an award in the past, they are eligible to apply again. AHEAD isn't intended as an ongoing operating grant program. However, past award recipients are encouraged to apply for a new project or expansion of a past successful project. We often get the question of whether project sponsors can submit more than one application per year. While technically it is allowed, it is highly unlikely that a sponsor will be awarded more than once in a program year. There are 8 different AHEAD project types, and sponsors will self-select the best fit based on their project objectives and activities. I will provide a brief definition for each project type, along with an example of what we have funded in the past. Capacity building refers to projects that increases the internal staff and/or operating capacity of sponsors. In the past, we've supported projects that help an organization hire its first paid executive director and other projects that provide staff with expert training so they can offer better service delivery to its clients. Other notable projects have allowed an organization to make upgrades to outdated or inadequate technology, which limits their capacity to serve clients and build partnerships. Entrepreneurial and micro-enterprise is a project type that supports entrepreneurs, micro-enterprises, and small businesses. For example, AHEAD has supported projects that offer business planning for local minority and women entrepreneurs or help with access to capital for micro and small businesses. Financial education provides financial capability and education to individuals and to communities. Examples include financial education workshops for immigrant communities or credit building programs for families preparing to buy a house. The most competitive proposals for financial education are often tied to specific goals, such as savings for a down payment on a house or establishing an emergency fund. Housing initiative projects can support housing in a variety of ways, as long as the project doesn't directly fund affordable housing construction and/or down payment and closing cost assistance. AHEAD cannot be used for AHP eligible housing projects or AHP eligible down payment assistance. For example, AHEAD couldn't be used to build affordable housing, but it could be used to fund a job training program at an affordable housing project. In the past, we've supported research studies for the feasibility of alternative housing types, such as tiny homes and ADUs. Housing initiative projects can also include support for housing counseling agencies, or HCAs, to provide low to moderate income households with pre-purchase counseling, foreclosure prevention, and other services. Job training projects will lead to job attainment or preservation, skill building, workforce development, and/or other job opportunities for clients. Some examples include construction training for formerly incarcerated people and workforce development opportunities for transition-aged youth. In the project featured on this slide, Red Feather Development Group is providing residents with basic construction skills to manage minor repairs and energy upgrades to their homes needed to reduce costs and improve habitability. This training is also intended to motivate greater interest in the construction trades that will increase the number of Indigenous professionals. Social services refers to projects that provide social services to clients and the community, with an economic development component included in the services. We've supported projects that provide life skills and professional development for domestic violence survivors and funding to support homelessness prevention programs. I want to emphasize that economic development should be the primary focus of any social services project, since AHEAD is an economic development grant program. Technical assistance projects provide direct technical assistance to clients and external parties. An example would be a nonprofit providing BIPOC or minority-owned businesses access to loan products, or direct technical assistance to rural farmers to formalize their businesses. Finally, other economic development is for projects that don't fit into one of the other project type categories. An example would include an urban farm providing jobs, healthy food, and environmental stewardship to local residents. Also, the other economic development category would be a local church providing employment and social services to their community. Sponsors should choose the project type that best describes the project. AHEAD is flexible and can be used for a variety of purposes, including paying for staff and consultants, training and program materials, research and market studies, etc. This list is not exhaustive or exclusive. Rather, it provides examples of eligible project uses. As a reminder, projects should be focused on economic development, and the uses of funds must be clearly defined in the application budget. Now, let's review the 2026 program timeline at a high level. We will get into the application details in a moment. AHEAD has one annual application period, which will open around the end of April. The date of the application period will be posted on our website. We have an application document submission process, which requires members to upload documents to the bank via a secure portal. The bank has to set up the secure portal for each application. We will announce a secure portal request deadline when we open the program and begin accepting applications. The application window will remain open until the close in late May. After applications close, we will then undergo a review period during the summer and announce the winners in early September. AHEAD Grant Award winners will have until early November 2026 to request funds. Members will have 30 days to disperse the funds to a sponsor. We encourage members to work with sponsors to submit the disbursement request shortly after the September award announcement. Compliance is the last piece. Funds must be fully spent, and the final project status report is due no later than March 2028. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Osama to talk about the application process.
We're now going to review the AHEAD application process, including a case study on how to complete the AHEAD application and budget. This timeline will serve as a roadmap for the remainder of the presentation. Let's dive into the application process in more detail. Only Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco bank members can apply. Interested project sponsors must partner with a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco on their application. The application materials for the 2026 program year will be available on our website soon. The application package must contain the following: the application and the budget, which are integrated into one Excel document, an IRS nonprofit status letter. For local government agencies and tribal associations, we would like to see the founding documents or other documentation establishing the organization, a management roster and board of directors roster for the project sponsor. Both rosters must be included and uploaded in a single document. If the project sponsor doesn't have a board of directors, then they should include a statement with the management roster stating this fact. Please note that if any of these documents aren't included in the application package, the application will be deemed ineligible. We receive a number of incomplete applications each year that are unfortunately deemed ineligible. Please take your time to submit a complete application package. To help with the application process, we put together an AHEAD application reference guide, a PDF document with detailed instructions on filling out and submitting the application. We won't review the guide during this session, but the guide will be available on the AHEAD resources page next to the application. We call the integrated application and budget the e-form, which is an Excel format. The e-form should be reviewed by both the member and the project sponsor. I will now open our 2026 application case study. The e-form has two tabs, an application tab and an application budget tab. The top of the application has the application deadline details and contact information if there are any questions. We highly encourage members and sponsors to look at our website and review the application guide, as it may answer your questions. At the very top of the application is a progress bar that shows how much of the application has been completed. As seen here, the application is currently at 93%. As we move through the application, we will eventually get to 100% complete, which is the point where a sponsor should then submit to the member for review and upload. If an application isn't complete, the progress bar will not show 100%, and we will deem the application ineligible. We've also included an application form input field legend. This provides tips on how each field behaves when data is inputted into it. An orange exclamation point means the field must be completed. A green check mark means the field has been completed correctly. A red X mark means the field has been filled out incorrectly or has an invalid entry. A gray field means the field isn't required. Note that some fields may appear grayed out at first, but as the application is filled out, it may become a required field. We've included an application table of contents. First, it provides an overview of the different application sections and includes hyperlinks that will move the user directly to that section. Second, it provides progress bars for each section. These progress bars work in the same way the overall project bar at the top right works. The table of contents provides an at-glance view of which sections need to be completed and/or have data entry errors. Project information. This information should be for the location of the project, not the nonprofit sponsor. We understand that some projects may be implemented in multiple locations. In those cases, you can include one of the locations in this section, and then explain the larger geographical footprint in the project summary section. We've instituted a 60-character limit for the project name, so please take this into account. We use the project name for marketing purposes, so nonprofit sponsors should think strategically about the name and how it would sound if they were to receive an award. We also ask that you ensure there are no typos, and please do not include punctuation or special characters, such as dollar signs, colons, hyphens, commas, etc. Please only include letters and numbers if relevant. Note that the state field and county field are drop-downs, so please select the correct fields from those lists. Both of these fields can be simply deleted if a user wants to start over. A state must be selected first before the county can be selected. In this case, California has been selected as the state, but the county has not been selected, even though it is a required field. We can click on the county and select Alameda, because Oakland, California is located in Alameda County. If we want to change the state after the county has been selected, delete the county first before selecting a different state. Both of these fields can be simply deleted if a user wants to start over. Member institution. The member institution section is self-explanatory, but should be the member contact that is responsible for this AHEAD application. This will be the member we contact with any questions. Sponsor information. Similarly, under sponsor information section, the sponsor contact should be the contact that is responsible for the AHEAD application, and that we can contact if we have any questions. Select the type of organization here. Under sponsor description, we ask to describe the sponsor's core mission, management structure, and accomplishments. The sponsor should focus on clear, concise overviews of its organization here. This isn't the location to discuss the project, so keep this section high level. Please also note the character limit. If the answer is greater than 3,000 characters, the table of contents will display an error message. One trick when writing in this section: to create a new paragraph, hit Alt-Enter. Hitting Enter by itself will move the cursor out of the field, so use this method to write multiple paragraphs. We also recommend not copying and pasting into this e-form. A head grant. In this section, we ask about the grant request and the start and end date of the use of AHEAD grant funds. Remember that the AHEAD grant is an 18-month grant period. So if you win the award, the funds must be fully spent within that time period. The start date cannot be earlier than September 2026. The AHEAD grant can cover expenses as early as September 1st, 2026, even if the dispersed award isn't received until later that fall. AHEAD is not intended to be a reimbursement program, so we expect all project expenses to be no earlier than September 2026. We also ask if the nonprofit sponsor has won an AHEAD award in the past. If this question is answered yes, the section below will allow input. Put the most recent awards first. Winning an award in past years doesn't exclude a sponsor from applying in the current year. Project summary. The next section is the project summary, where we ask the sponsor to describe the project that will use the AHEAD funds. Please keep this section brief. We are looking for clarity in this section so that we fully understand the project. Again, please note the character limit. We want sponsors to describe how the project or program will work, how it will benefit low to moderate income households or communities, what goals the project will look to achieve, and what impacts and outcomes are expected if the project receives an AHEAD grant. This is also the section to clearly outline the individual and community economic benefits of receiving AHEAD funds. Be as specific as possible about the project activities and beneficiaries. For example, if your project focuses on providing technical assistance sessions, please describe how many sessions will be provided and who will be attending these workshops. We are looking for innovative projects, so please consider that when applying for AHEAD. For project type, the e-form will allow only one answer to be selected. Note that if other economic development is chosen as the project type, the grayed out field box will become yellow. So please briefly describe the type of economic development in the box provided. Underneath project types are a set of questions that are required for all AHEAD projects and help us determine eligibility. The AHEAD program grant funds must benefit low to moderate wage earners, small businesses, the greater community, or low-income households, which is why we ask these questions. The first question asks about job creation or preservation. Sponsors should include the number of jobs being created or preserved with the use of the AHEAD grant. And keep in mind, we will follow up on this question during compliance if the project is awarded a grant. Depending on the specifics of your project, this may either be one number of staff supported by AHEAD grants at your organization or the clients you support to obtain or maintain their employment. The next 4 questions will help us determine eligibility for the program, and at least one of these questions must be answered yes to be eligible for an AHEAD grant. The last question asks about the AMI of the people who will receive services from the sponsor. AMI refers to Area Median Income. AMI is available on HUD's website and should be used based on the primary project location. Underneath these questions are 5 sets of questions that correspond to the project type that was selected. Fill out the current and future impact of the project here. For this case study, the project type selected was entrepreneurial and microenterprise. The next section talks about targeted beneficiaries. Please check all that apply. If other at-risk populations is selected, then briefly describe what other population is being served with the project. The next section asks about targeted service area, which is a drop-down list. If other is selected, then briefly describe the service area. Peri-urban refers to a geographical location that exhibits both rural and urban characteristics, typically an area between town and rural. A good example would be parts of Reno, which exhibit areas that quickly transition from urban to more rural. Project results. The next section asks how the project results will be measured or evaluated. Again, note the character limit. We want the sponsor to clearly describe how they will measure results or successes for the project. In our experience reviewing applications, quantitative measures are easier to understand and to compare to at a later date, but it is up to the sponsor to determine their measurement and evaluation methods. If awarded an AHEAD grant, sponsors will report on these metrics during compliance. Other FHL Bank San Francisco programs. This section is for informational purposes only. Please fill out to the best of your ability, and if you have questions about awards in other programs offered by the bank, please reach out to us. Project use of funds. The next section deals with the project use of funds. As a reminder, the AHEAD grant must be fully used within 18 months of the date awarded. So this section specifically asks whether the sponsor will be able to use the funds within this time frame. We will review the expected length of the project timeline, so please make sure the AHEAD funds can be used within 18 months. We then ask the sponsor to briefly describe how AHEAD funds will actually be used during this time frame. The next section asks about member involvement in the project. Based on the relationship and involvement between the member and sponsor, please list whether the member is providing any type of financial or non-financial support to the project. Examples of non-financial support or involvement by the member could be sharing financial education curriculum, volunteer staff, or being involved as a board member with the sponsor. The last two sections ask about other funding sources and other organizations involved in the project. Fill out both of these sections to the best of your ability. These sections are for informational purposes only to help us evaluate the total scope of the project, so there is no right or wrong answer. We ask for both financial sources of funds and non-financial sources, as in other organizations that are involved in the project. We only allow a few responses in this section of the application, so please choose the sources or organizations that are most involved in the project. Please be sure that the funding sources listed here are included on the application budget. Now that we've reviewed the application, let's look at the Ahead Budget tab. The budget workbook will automatically input project name, sponsor name, and budget start and end dates at the top. Note, there is also a link at the top right corner. This is visible at all times and can be clicked to go back to the application. The budget includes brief instructions on filling out the two sections of the budget, the sources sections and the uses of funds section. These are also available in the reference guide. Fill out the project budget application column for sources. These are all sources of funds for the project, including Ahead. If the Ahead grant is the total budget, this is acceptable. The requested Ahead grant amount will be inputted automatically into the budget. In this example, the Ahead grant is already pre-filled, and the project is expecting $25,000 in government grants, $60,000 in foundation grants, and $17,000 in organizational income, and then $10,000 for other fee-for-service income, for a total project budget of $190,000. We have these other line items, which you can use for other line items that don't fit into one of the existing categories. But please be specific if you use this line item. Include an item description here. Fill out the other sources committed and other sources anticipated. We understand that your anticipated column may be an estimate, so fill this out to the best of your ability. Fill out the project budget application column for uses. This should be all of the expenses expected for the project. Sponsors should remember that backup documentation may be required for every line item. We encourage you to select line items that are easy to track. In this example, the sponsor is requesting $78K in Ahead. We can see they've allocated it to 4 different expense line items. We also ask for the other sources. In this example, $112,000 needs to be allocated to different expenses. If you look at the salaries and wages in the budget, it is showing $80,000 in expenses. Ahead will cover $36,000, and other sources will cover $44,000. And the far right column should balance out to 0. Note on other line items. We leave space for other line items, but please be specific if you use this. For example, we have $5,000 here in this budget with no description. I will correct that now. A note on admin fees. We don't allow admin fees to members, but if a nonprofit has a fiscal sponsor or is part of a larger national nonprofit that provides services, we will allow that expense. Now fill out the ahead requested column. This should be for exact expenses you expect to use on the ahead funds. Fill out the other sources column. No need to break out committed and anticipated sources anymore. A note on overhead expenses. Program expenses should be for expenses specific to the project or program. An example would be curriculum and instructional supplies directly tied to a financial education program offered by the sponsor. Overhead expenses should be for general expenses shared across different projects or programs managed by the sponsor. These are essentially indirect or administrative costs, such as rent, utilities, office supplies, etc. We typically see overhead or indirect costs in the 10 to 15% range of the total project budget. Sponsors should be prepared to provide backup documentation for this section, even if it's a straight indirect cost percentage. Now we've intentionally not balanced this budget because we want to see the behavior of the form when there are errors. And so we can help correct those errors together. But assuming we think we filled out this budget correctly, we would then navigate back to the application form and then hit the checkbox. This should only be checked after the budget is done. When we check that box, we get a red error message saying the budget does not balance and to go back to the budget and correct any errors. When we go back to the budget, all errors will be highlighted in red so that we can easily fix them. Errors are typically the following. The must equal 0 column on the right should be 0. The excess and deficiency row at the bottom should also equal 0. So on the sources side, we can see the foundation grants has not been properly allocated between committed and anticipated sources. We've identified $60,000 in foundation grants, but only have $45,000 under anticipated. So we have a $15,000 imbalance. If we enter 15,000 into this section and click enter, the error message goes away. And this part of the budget is now balanced. But let's review the uses and see if there's an error message down there. And we can see there is no error message. So this budget is now complete. When we navigate back to the application, we can see a green check mark has now appeared on the form. We can now go back to the top of the application and try to figure out why we are not at 100% complete. If we look at the table of contents, we can see that all sections are complete except project summary. If we click on project summary, we can see that we missed filling out a section here in the project impact. So in this example, we are going to say that 50 entrepreneurs or small businesses are currently served by the sponsor of this project, and the AHEAD grant will allow for 100 more people to be served. And now that this is an acceptable answer, we can see the green check marks. And when we click back to the top of the application, we see that we've reached 100%. The application is now complete and ready for the project sponsor to submit to the member. Please don't forget to save your work as you make your way through this application. Document submission. All applications and supporting documents must be submitted via the Bank Secure portal, and only members can access the portal at this time. Members may submit up to 10 AHEAD project applications. It is imperative that members request a workspace by the deadline, so that the bank has enough time to set up the workspace and the member has enough time to upload the application before the deadline. We typically have a 2 to 3 day turnaround to grant access after a request. A sponsor will complete the AHEAD application and then route the documents to their member partner. All personal identifying information must be redacted from the application documents, including social security numbers, bank account numbers, and personal addresses, phone numbers, and emails. We cannot accept documents into the portal with PII, and we do not have the capacity to redact this information for you. Again, if personal identifying information is included in the application, it will be deemed ineligible. For example, in the past, we've seen retired board member home addresses. Please redact this. The workspace will contain 3 folders for each of the application documents. Members can learn more about uploading documents in our reference guide, How to Upload AHEAD Documents, which will be available on our website soon.
Now that we've gone over the application process, we will briefly review the final 2 steps if a project is awarded an AHEAD grant. Here is the timeline we saw earlier. Assuming a project is selected for an AHEAD grant, this is where we are at in the process, the disbursement request period. As a reminder, the application round will close in late May, and after we review the applications in July and August, we will make the award announcement in September. So those projects that have been selected for an award will move on to disbursement. And then we will have until March 2028 to spend the grant funds. There are 3 key steps for the disbursement of AHEAD grants. First is the announcement, which takes place in September. The AHEAD awards will be announced on the bank's public website and in an email to all applicants. We will also send an email to each member and sponsor on winning projects with detailed instructions on how to access grant funds. In the second step, the member will need to submit a disbursement request to us, which includes 3 documents: a signed program agreement, a certification and disbursement request, or CDR, and a disbursement budget. I will go over these more in a minute. But the important thing to note here is that the disbursement package must be submitted to the bank so that the bank can disperse the funds by November 6, 2026. Otherwise, the grant funds will be lost. We encourage members to submit the documents as early as possible after award announcement. The last step, assuming a complete disbursement package, is the bank will disperse the grant funds to the member. As Osama mentioned earlier, we pass ahead grants through our members, so the funds will go from us to the member and then on to the sponsor. Once the member receives the grant funds, which will be deposited into the member's settlement transaction account, or STA, they will have 30 days to disperse the funds to the sponsor. We leave it up to the member and sponsor to work out the best way to disperse the funds after the bank has dispersed to the member. All of the documents must be submitted via the bank secure portal. This portal is different from the portal at application, so the member will need to submit a new secure portal request form. This workspace will be the same one used for compliance. Now we will dive a little deeper into the 3 documents in the disbursement package. The first disbursement document is the program agreement. This is a 5-page document that is a contract between the bank, the member, and the sponsor. Because it is a contract, we recommend having your legal team review before signing. And it must be signed by an authorized signer of the member institution and project sponsor organization. The program agreement will be available on the bank's website, so please review the document prior to submitting an application. Please keep in mind that the parties are agreeing to spend funds according to the application and budget. Fully expend ahead funds within 18 months when compliance is due. Notify us if changes or delays. We've noticed some winning projects from the last few years that aren't using all of the ahead grant during the grant period and are seeking extensions. While we understand some projects have legitimate delays, and we do have the ability to grant extensions on a case-by-case basis, we would prefer not to. Instead, we are asking members and sponsors to be more aware of the 18-month grant period and make sure the ahead funds will be spent during that time frame. Sponsors that show a pattern of not using the funds within 18 months of award will be noted when reviewing their future applications. The CDR is a 1-page document which is only filled out by the member, in which the member certifies to the bank that all program requirements have been met. The CDR will be available on the bank's website, so please feel free to review anytime. The disbursement budget explains how ahead funds will be used based on actual award and any other changes to the budget since the time of application. About 5 months will have passed between when you submit the application and when awards are announced. And we understand that some projects may experience minor changes to the budget in that time. However, if there are major changes in the project or budget between application and award, please let the bank know as soon as possible so we can discuss options. We won't go into detail about the disbursement budget today because we will provide some more detailed instructions to projects that receive an award, and we can also provide direct technical assistance to members and sponsors on the disbursement process. Now that we've gone over the disbursement process, let's briefly review the final component of receiving an ahead grant: compliance. Here is the program timeline again. Assuming a project is selected for an ahead grant and the funds have been dispersed, the sponsor and the member will have a compliance responsibility to report how the ahead funds were used and to keep track of project expenses. We have an 18-month compliance period. So for grants that win an award this year, the funds must be fully spent and compliance documents must be submitted no later than March 31st, 2028, which is 18 months from award date in September. A sponsor and a member can submit compliance documents anytime during this 18-month period, so you don't have to wait until March 2028 if the project ends earlier. In fact, we encourage submission of compliance documents as soon as the AHEAD funds have been fully spent and goals achieved. Please do not wait until the deadline to inform us of changes in the project scope or budgets or delays. The compliance package must include the following documents, which we'll discuss briefly. The AHEAD project status report, AHEAD compliance budget, backup documentation for use of AHEAD grants. The bank has simplified our program compliance process to streamline and reduce the time and effort required for members and sponsors to submit documentation. Some projects will be selected for an abbreviated compliance review. The bank will determine which projects are eligible for an abbreviated compliance review based on a number of factors, including the AHEAD application and the project sponsor's history with the AHEAD program. Please note that even if a project is selected for abbreviated compliance and therefore only submits a project status report, we do reserve the right to request additional documentation. As with the rest of AHEAD, all documents must be submitted via the bank's secure portal, same as disbursement. It's important to note that if compliance documentation and/or requirements aren't met, we would deem a project as non-compliant. Non-compliance could include the following matters: not spending the entire AHEAD grant within 18 months, not delivering a complete compliance package within 18 months, including lack of backup documentation if relevant, any major changes to the scope of the project or budget without bank approval, or not curing any deficiencies within a reasonable time frame. We take compliance very seriously and want all members and sponsors to know that non-compliance in past years may impact a member or sponsor from receiving an AHEAD award in this current year or in future years. The first piece of compliance is the final project status report, which certifies that program requirements have been met. It will also ask about the following: the final status of the project, including what was accomplished, what impacts and outcomes were achieved prior to what was stated in the original application. All projects must submit a PSR. The project status report is due when the AHEAD funds have been fully spent and no later than 18 months after the award date. The project status report is currently available on the bank's website, so we encourage all members and sponsors to review the report to better understand the bank's expectation and to help with putting together the application for this round. Those required to do full compliance will need to submit a budget. The compliance budget explains how AHEAD funds were actually used along with any other changes to the budget since time of disbursement. This should be essentially the same as the disbursement budget, so we won't review it at this time, but it will look familiar. Those required to do full compliance will need to submit backup documentation. We will communicate full versus abbreviated, so it's important to track and save documentation throughout grant period in case the project is selected for full review. The final piece of compliance is backup documentation, which tends to be one of the more confusing pieces of compliance. This also ties directly to application. Backup documentation is required for the entire AHEAD grant amount. Each line item identified on the budget must have some type of acceptable backup documentation proving the AHEAD grant funds were used for that purpose. A sponsor should carefully consider which types of expenses would be better to fund with AHEAD due to this backup documentation requirement versus perhaps another funding source. Here are a few examples of acceptable backup documentation for common ahead expenses. For salaries, wages, or benefits, we prefer a sponsor submit W-2s, but we can also accept pay stubs or a detailed payroll report. For consultants or other professional services, we typically require paid invoices or copies of checks. For indirect overhead, we typically see a federal allocation report or a written explanation from the sponsor. Other expenses. Please ask the bank about other uses not listed on the budget or discussed in the webinar. I'd like to emphasize the importance of backup documentation for compliance purposes. It is a requirement of receiving the AHEAD grant. And as a reminder, non-compliance may impact receiving an award this year or in future years.